For more than a decade, there's been a push in Boston for new housing to be developed near rapid transit. It's a way to cut back on traffic congestion and greenhouse gases, but it can also help meet the need for affordable units, whether newly built or preserved. And there's more help for affordability thanks to the Local Initiative Support Corporation, or LISC, in Boston. To tell us about an increase in its revolving loan fund is its executive director, Kelleher. Thank you very much for being with us, Karen.
Thanks so much for having me, Chris.
First of all, maybe explain what LISC is. You're not exactly a community development corporation and you're not a private company, so what exactly is LISC?
We are a nonprofit organization and a community development financial institution. We're one of the largest community development support companies in the country, but we have very deep local roots. So we've been working in Massachusetts for over 35 years with a heavy concentration in Boston and its neighborhoods where low-income people live, but we are also focused statewide on low-income communities with a heavy focus on the gateway cities at this point.
Well, I know we've had the term transit-oriented housing even before the beginnings of this revolving loan fund, but when the fund was started up, you had these partners, the Hines Foundation, the Boston Foundation. What were you thinking of when you set up this fund?
I think it's the impact of the then growing affordable housing crisis on the low-income neighborhoods in Boston that are being affected by displacement, and the pushing of low-income communities away from what are increasingly attractive sites near transit for real estate developers. So this fund is intended to put community-based developers in a position of being able to acquire sites near transit and develop them as affordable or mixed-income housing to create those transit-based opportunities for low-income people who really need the access to transit to get to jobs, to get to schools, to get to services that they need to get to shopping.
I remember in earlier time when it seemed that transit-oriented housing was something that only a nonprofit would do because the market wasn't that interested. But these days, I think the market is very interested, and I guess that poses a problem for affordability, doesn't it?
It's a significant problem. Transit-oriented development sites are among the most popular. There's a premium paid in the market for them. And so it's all the more important that we equip developers who are interested in developing affordable housing, which, by the way, requires a much longer development process, requires the assembly of a lot of resources and subsidy. It can be very difficult to compete with a cash buyer who's able to go and develop market rate development.
So I imagine your fund helping, let's say, a community development corporation bid on and maybe acquire and develop a piece of land. How much help do you give them exactly?
It's a great question, Chris, because this is not actually a huge fund, but what we do is we provide early capital on very flexible terms that enables them to buy a property, and we'll even loan them more money than the cost of the property. We'll go above the value of the property, which is not going to ever happen in a market rate lending transaction because you don't have collateral to support the loan. We do that so that a community-based developer can pay the full price, not have to come out of pocket with cash equity, and pay for some of the pre-development costs that are necessary to get that property to development.
Well, if you look at what's happened with this fund so far, counting both new construction and preserved affordable units, what does it look like as far as how many affordable units and how affordable they are?
We have about 22 projects we've invested in, and some of those we've paid for the acquisition loan. We financed the acquisition loan. In others, it's a pre-development loan only. Those projects have created over 1,500 units of housing. Some are preservation, properties that were at risk of being lost, but many of them are new construction. And of those 1,500 plus units, 72% are affordable. So they're not all 100% affordable. It's quite typical to have a mix of incomes. Increasingly over time, that's become the case with
and even a fair amount of low-income range here too. It's not just the almost middle-class kind of income.
No, there are a few what people often call workforce units in some of these projects, and I'm happy to tell some of the stories. There's the one in right by Forest Hills. It's called AO Flats. That includes half affordable and half workforce units. I think there's 146 units in that development. So those are all not at the top of the market. In a transforming market, combating displacement is an important part of what this fund is intended to do.
This is BNN News, and we're talking with Karen Kelleher from LISC Boston. Karen, what also interests me about this fund is you're getting other people to buy into it, other parties. And in the healthcare field, why is that happening?
This is a really important change we're seeing. Banks have invested in affordable housing for many years since the CRA was created.
Community Reinvestment Act.
Thank you. There hasn't been a new class of private sector investors in quite some time. Healthcare is really jumping in because I believe they come to understand that it's social determinants, things like your stable housing, stable income, the access to recreation, transportation, healthy foods, these things affect health more than clinical care. And so several of our healthcare institutions are really trying to roll up their sleeves and figure out how can they, as anchor institutions or healthcare institutions, invest in the communities where their patients are to better support their health.
We've seen a lot of new units in Boston with varying degrees of affordability, but when you look outside the city, in most of the surrounding communities, it looks a lot more difficult. What about your efforts to change that equation?
Yeah, there's a lot of work to be done to really increase the urgency with which the Commonwealth is responding to our affordable housing crisis. So we have a crisis of affordability that is creeping up the income scale. And that's caused by a lot of things that probably I don't need to go into. But the need for additional housing production, including affordable housing production outside of Boston, is critical. Boston cannot do this alone. We are increasing the amount of jobs that we have available in our economy in Eastern Massachusetts, but we are not catching up on housing production. So there is both an affordability challenge and a related just scarcity challenge.
One thing is worth unpacking, because I guess when you've got that much growth in demand, this is not just about helping the people who are relatively needy, because that's a problem for people who are even not needy, because their prices must be getting pushed up too.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. This fund it's interesting because it's a statewide fund. About half of the developments have been in Boston, though. So anti-displacement is an important part of the strategy. And so there are projects like Coppersmith Village in East Boston, which is a new construction project almost on the waterfront, right next to several luxury developments, that's really creating, grabbing a parcel and turning it into something that's going to retain its affordability long term. But there's also developments in Codman Square, where we're taking existing housing that was at risk of becoming market rate housing and enabling the CDC in that neighborhood, Codman Square, to be able to keep that housing affordable for the people who live there.
We should mention you've got some more details and more programs as well. Is there a place online where people can find out about that?
Absolutely. They can go on to www.lisc.org/Boston, and you can learn about the fund and some of LISC's other work.
Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you.
Kelleher from LISC Boston.